It's day 7 of talking about Anne of Cleves, and today we're going to think about her separation and annulment for her marriage to Henry VIII, which she's often described as being lucky. Over the next few days, I think we might reevaluate in some ways our opinion of quite how lucky she was. The night of the wedding, which we talked about yesterday. We talked about her wedding yesterday. They are ceremoniously put to bed, as was tradition, tucked in, night, and get on with making some heirs, please. It's not really known if the marriage was consummated for various reasons. Was there an issue on Henry's side? Or did he, a medical issue, or did he just not like her? And there's a couple of reasons why we're not sure about that. Obviously, there was no pregnancy. He claims he couldn't or wouldn't consummate the marriage because he didn't like her. He believed from looking at her body that she wasn't a virgin, and he thinks he could tell that from the way her body looked. She obviously was. She 100% was. She had literally never left her mother's side. We also have a conversation with her ladies. Now, we do have to take this conversation with a pinch of salt because it was used as evidence later on for Henry that the marriage wasn't consummated. So, also we need to remember the fact her English was pretty poor at this time, and it was quite a delicate conversation with lots of, where context is important. Barky dog. So she has a conversation with her ladies about whether or not she could be pregnant yet, and she describes what their bedtime is like. And supposedly she said the king kisses me and holds my hand and says good night sweetheart, and he goes to sleep, and in the morning he says good morning sweetheart and gives me a kiss and goes on his merry way. And the ladies sort of are laughing maybe about the fact that she thinks this is enough for her to be with child because she has lain with the king. So again, conversation pinch of salt. It may be that she was that naive. It was the mother's job, so it would have been her mother's job to let her know what would be expected of her as a wife or what might have happened on the wedding night. So she possibly was very naive to all of that, but we'll never really know. It seems that it possibly wasn't consummated, but whether or not that was for Henry's dislike or some other issue. Despite this, he did spend every other night with her, and we do know that his potential impotency had been sort of an ongoing rumour since Anne Boleyn. So various factors in play there. To start with, she seemed to have been quite keen to please him. She was dressing in an English style with the French hood that he apparently liked, made popular by Anne Boleyn, but eventually got tired of trying to kind of please him. No one, apart from the king, had a bad word to say against her. I mean, you think that whole journey to England, people seem to be very keen on her. She's got the manners of a princess, etc. He does, obviously, around this time, and we won't talk about this too much because this is Catherine Howard's story, he does start to show an interest in Catherine Howard, which obviously does annoy Anne of Cleves. I say obviously, I think sometimes we assume that she didn't want to come to England, she didn't want to marry him, must have been massively relieved when he latched on to somebody else, and that doesn't seem to have been the case. I think she genuinely wanted to be a good wife, and she wanted to, she'd had a little taste of being queen. She wanted that to continue. So she wasn't all that happy when he his eyes started. We see a couple of things happen then. Firstly, Cromwell has realised, or maybe it's been made known to him, made clear to him, if he's going to survive, he needs to fix this. He needs to secure a divorce from Anne of Cleves. Now, they don't want to alienate William in Cleves. They want him as an ally. So that is an issue. So that's a problem. Thomas Cromwell needs to figure this out. Anne is moved around the end of June. She's moved to Richmond, and the excuse given is to keep her away from the plague. But she very much feels like she has been discarded, and she starts to panic now because she's thinking about Catherine of Aragon being, shoved elsewhere so he could, crack on with Anne Boleyn. He's got his eye on Catherine Howard. He shoved Anne into this house in Richmond under the, excuse of plague. So she's writing to her brother. She's not very happy about it. She's very worried about this situation. In July, clergy are given a commission to investigate this marriage and try and find a way out of it. Anne has to consent to this, which she does, but took the news heavily. So she is worried about this. You think about, you've got a cast-off wife, you've got a divorced wife. You've got a cast-off wife, you've got a executed wife, another that's died. It's scary for her, and especially with the language barrier, again, maybe not being fully aware of what's going on. Anyway, so she consents to this investigation. They eventually get this document from Cleves showing that the engagement that she had prior is definitely done, but they note that it's stamped with this kind of mark of a beer pot, I think it's referred to, and it all looks little bit dubious. So they kind of questioning the legitimacy of this document, which was created in 1535. So she's been out of that promise for a little while. On the 7th of July, it was all over. They had decreed that the king and Anne were not bound by this marriage. The marriage was essentially annulled. She was given no sort of representation. She wasn't given the chance to kind of put any evidence forward like Catherine of Aragon had been. So the grounds that this was annulled on were threefold. Firstly, the engagement to Lorraine. They didn't believe that it was completely finished. There was that. Henry, in a way, didn't give consent to the marriage because he didn't want to do it. So that's another one. And also the fact, or possible fact, that it wasn't consummated, and you've got that evidence from her ladies from that conversation to go towards that. It's reported that publicly she took this news very well, but apparently privately she screamed, was terrified, fainted, and basically was told, or came under the impression at least, that if she just accepted this divorce, she would be treated very well. And I think she was too frightened to do otherwise. She put her brave face on, she accepted it, and she wrote to the king with a very warm letter saying that she hopes the king will accept her as your sister, for which I most humbly thank you accordingly. And he obviously does go on to refer to her as his most beloved sister. So there we go. Anne of Cleves is no longer queen, although in her eyes she always will be. And I think we think of her as very lucky, and she was, but I think she was lucky because either she was advised or she realised that she just needed to go with this, because my impression is very much, and people can argue with me here if they want, is that if she'd have kicked up a fuss here, if she'd have played a Catherine of Aragon, and again, this is no shade on Catherine of Aragon, she had a daughter to think about. If she hadn't have gone quietly, I think it would have ended very differently for her. So I think it is part luck, but I think it's also just really good instinct and really good acting. So I'll see you tomorrow when we are going to talk about what her life was like a bit after that. See you then.